Hello fellow cinephiles, the Film Dude here. Thanks for joining me today. So with the untimely death of Chuck Russell recently this week, I thought I'd go back and tackle some of the movies that I enjoyed of his, or some of the films that I think define him as a filmmaker. 4 or 5 that stood out to me, ones that I enjoy, ones I go back to, and ones that define him a bit more as a filmmaker and a horror filmmaker, and just his style and design of the things he wanted to make. So I just sort of want to break those down and which films I enjoyed the most. So Chuck Russell sort of began as a writer, and then he sort of appeared on the scene with Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Warriors. Now this was a very interesting, inventive film, was very creative. It is definitely arguably one of the best of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, and in what my friend coined the Nancy trilogy with original Nightmare, Nightmare, Dream Warriors, and New Nightmare. I love the inventiveness of this film. It was creepy and interesting, had a great cast. There was sort of stop motion aspect to it with puppetry when Freddy comes to life as one of the puppets. Just the deaths are interesting, and just the practicality to a lot of the horror elements to it was really inventive and interesting, and he brought a lot to it, and I really love what he did with this film. And it really sort of, with the Nightmare on Elm Street films, the first one sort of kick-started the whole franchise and is a really brilliant film that you can revisit now and still really great. Where the second one is a divisive film that not a lot of people liked. I think it's kind of interesting. I liked a lot of aspects to it. But this third film felt like a return to form, and for him to come onto a movie like that and to deliver another horror film in a franchise that was gaining steam, and to deliver such an interesting film and arguably one of the best films in the series, is just a testament to him as a filmmaker. And I really love what he did with that movie, and it's a film I return to, and it's a great starting point, I think, for him as a filmmaker. From that, he went on to do a remake of The Blob, and this movie's great. Much like Nightmare on Elm Street, is very inventive in what he does with it, and creative, and the idea of what the blob and the substance of the blob actually do, where they sort of, when they engulf a person, they sort of melt them. It's kind of interesting, and it's sort of definitely a product of the 80s sort of gorier horror films and stuff that Friday the 13th and Hellraiser and movies like that would do. But it's definitely an inventive film. It's a great take on the sort of classic story from the 50s. It starred Steve McQueen. It was a film that had a cult classic status, and no one ever thought it would be something that would be returned to and be successful again. And yet here we are, and this is what he did. And it's a great cast, and it's a really fun and entertaining film, and very inventive and very practical. This is something you start to see with a lot of the films that Chuck Russell was doing, especially the ones that are very popular. The practicality to it, what he delivers with it, and what he was doing with horror for those first 2 films is really inventive and interesting, and I really like what he did. And he sort of shifts from those. His next couple of films are, more of a comedy and an action film, with The Mask. This was something that was originally meant to be a horror film, because of the comics of The Mask are very dark and sort of and the studio kind of wanted that aspect. And it was Chuck Russell that sort of came along and said, look, I can take this material and make it a bit more comical, a bit more fun and entertaining, and move away from the horror aspect. And he did, and it became a very successful film, not only for the studio and for him, but also for Jim Carrey. It was one of those films that just took off and has become a classic in the Jim Carrey sort of canon, and it's a film that people return to. I know I do. They saved a bit of money having Jim Carrey in it. They didn't have to do as much prosthetics or digital work, because it was all sort of what Jim Carrey could do with his elastic face. It's really great. And there are some practicalities to it, and very creative, and it sort of verges on the line of supernatural comedy and a little bit of dark horror, especially when the villain ultimately puts a mask on. But it's a very interesting film, and yet again, the practicality and the creativity, and that's what Chuck Russell always injected in all the movies he made, and this is a great example of it. It's entertaining, it's fun, it has great cast like his 2 previous films, and it just is a true comedy sort of fantasy classic, and that's a testament to him once again. And then he moved on to doing an action film with Eraser with Schwarzenegger. It was sort of Schwarzenegger's return to form in a way. He hadn't had a lot of great success with previous films that he had done, and this was kind of his comeback in a way. And I really liked that. I think he added so much. It was his comeback in a way, and I liked that. And it's definitely one of his best, or better, at least better, action movies that he did. And it's creative and interesting. There's a bit more visual effects in it, but there is still a practicality to it. I like the sort of fantasy sci-fi element to it with these sort of guns that shoot lasers. I kind of like that aspect, which is inventive. And, it's one of the last really great James Caan performances. The action's really cool. There's choices made in that are a bit different. Schwarzenegger's really great in it. James Coburn's solid in his small role. And I just really like the execution of this film. This is the period and the films that he made that are most remembered, that are most revisited, that are he's most successful in a lot of ways. Now, another film he did I liked and was fun and entertaining, but it wasn't one of probably his best, was The Scorpion King. And it was sort of his origin story. It was a bit more humorous, a bit more goofy, a bit more silly than The Mummies kind of were. But it is still a very entertaining film that has a lot of great action set pieces, and Chuck Russell's just having fun with it, and so is Dwayne Johnson and a lot of the cast. And this is just the type of films he made. Granted, Chuck Russell isn't in the same realm as Spielberg or Scorsese or people like that, but he definitely made a mark. He definitely made films that had an imprint on the consciousness of cinema, that films we return to, maybe not Scorpion King, but the other ones. His filmography, even in just these 4 or 5 films he made that are probably his best in his career, you could really see the type of filmmaker he was: creative, inventive, having fun, crafting interesting stories, very practical with his execution of particular things in the films he made. The casting that he had, some great actors that he chose to work with and bring onto these particular projects. And a lot of his writing as well is a lot of stuff that he co-wrote as well. And I'm just a fan, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm just a fan of the films he made and the choices he chose to do. And yeah, he hadn't had a big film or a hit or made a lot of films in recent years, but at least we got these films to go back to. His most recent film, Witchboard, which was another remake of an 80s horror film, I still haven't seen that one, and from the trailer it looks pretty interesting and definitely returned to form of the type of films he made with these films I mentioned. I think it's only been in recent years that I've taken notice of Chuck Russell and the films he actually did, and how much I really enjoyed those films. And a lot of them are part of my early teens and teenage sort of years, that definitely had an imprint and made a mark on me as a film watcher. And that just shows that he had something as a filmmaker. He was able to project what he wanted to make in the films he made, and made a definite impact and mark on cinema in a different way to the film greats. And I just wanted to sort of celebrate that, because I think he was an interesting filmmaker. Definitely tried different things, and he sort of mastered a genre, like the horror genre with the first 2 films, and then the sort of action genre when we get to Eraser and Scorpion King, and sort of humor and comedy with a bit of darkness that he did with The Mask. Tribute to him in a way, because The Mask was definitely one of Jim Carrey's early films that really cemented him as the comic genius he ultimately became. He said, "I considered it a privilege to have worked with Chuck Russell, who during the shooting of The Mask created a childlike atmosphere of wonder and cabaret on his sets. The entire cast and crew were touched and inspired by his playfulness." That's kind of high praise from one of the kings of comedy. And you can see that he did have an impact on not only the films he made, the audiences, but also on the cast and crew that he worked with, and the actors that he was able to work with, and how much fun they had with him. And I think that's what makes, to me, a sort of a great filmmaker, is someone who's sort of childlike and playful and is able to craft really childlike films that we love as children, but you need to have that childlike wonder and exploring of these particular things for audiences to really connect or have fun with your movies. And he was definitely one of those. As I mentioned many times, he's a filmmaker whose films I go back to time and time again. And it is kind of, we're getting to that age now as time goes on where we start to lose these directors, where these directors start to get a lot older and sort of disappear, either out of the limelight or die or whatever sort of transpires. And it's just so great that we're able to revisit these movies that they're able to make even when they're not here anymore. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Letterboxd and Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.